Part 20. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen-Mi-san. Chapter 193. Several agents kept shooting explosive crossbows at the sumo wrestler, but the fat of this big guy seemed to be much stronger than it looked. Every explosion could only tear the sumo wrestler's body apart. A blood hole the size of the mouth of a bowl, not to mention the core located deep in the body, cannot even penetrate the thick layer of fat. This should be regarded as a kind of special ability. The defensive power of this fat body feels no less than the outer armor of a tank. K-Lan couldn't help but say, if this layer of fat is not penetrated, the security bureaus the agents cannot inject the active cells containing the flesh-eating worm into the nucleus, so naturally there is no way to kill this mutant. Of course, they can directly throw out the whole flesh-eating worm as bait. In this case, even if they cannot reach the core of the mutant, they can still poison this guy to death with this amazing dose, but it's very difficult. Obviously, these agents would not make this choice unless absolutely necessary. Upon seeing this, Victoria immediately shouted, "Fire the heavy crossbow!" Bang! In the blink of an eye, a stream of light penetrated the sumo wrestler's abdomen. With a sound like cracking silk, the barb of the giant crossbow tore a huge hole in the sumo wrestler's abdomen, and the yellow fat was mixed with the flesh. The intestines filled with filth immediately flowed all over the floor, and a stench that was enough to turn a person over instantly swept over him. But just when the security agent was about to tighten the steel cable, the sumo wrestler grabbed the giant crossbow hooked on his belly first, and with a strong tug, he actually pulled the entire crossbow from the base. After being pulled down, the agent who was operating next to the ballista was simply unlucky. He flew dozens of meters away, and his forehead was visibly dented. When he fell to the ground, it's already a corpse. That wasn't the end of it. The sumo wrestler simply regarded the ballista as a meteor hammer and swung it heavily towards K-Lan and the others. Gan, K-Lan cursed secretly, grabbed Ashkani beside him and quickly stepped back. The alloy-made ballista was thrown in front of them with a strong gust of wind. The two security bureau agents who were stationed further forward and had no time to dodge were not so lucky. The ballista directly knocked the two people to the ground, then ran over them, and after a burst of orders, amidst the heart-stopping sound of bones cracking, two pools of non-human-shaped flesh suddenly appeared on the ground, and the splash of blood and minced meat even touched K-Ian's face. Ashkani was stunned for several seconds before he reacted. He quickly turned around and shouted to the soldiers behind him, "Suppress it with fire! Quick, suppress it with fire!" 4 bloodhound mechas immediately stepped forward, and the 8 twin-mounted heavy machine cannons began to roar. Countless bullet casings fell to the ground with a clinking sound, and the intensive firepower instantly hit the sumo wrestler. Blood splattered all over his body. "Keep shooting. Maintain suppression," Ashkani shouted again, "reduce the tissue on the target's body as much as possible. Using ammunition in exchange for the thick layer of fat on the mutant's body is indeed a good deal. As long as it can expose its core, the agents of the Security Bureau will have a chance to kill it." But at this moment, the sumo wrestler suddenly let out a series of vague low roars, and its body trembled violently. A large number of tough tentacles broke through the skin and grew out, wrapping around the body to form a thick layer of armor. Not only that, the surface of these tentacles also secreted a large amount of greasy mucus. When the machine gun shells hit it, they actually slid away. Only the few shells hitting at a nearly vertical angle could break the tentacles. The epidermis, within a few seconds of use, these only wounds disappeared. In addition to its defensive ability, the recovery ability of this living armor is also abnormal. Damn, is this a mutant? This is too powerful. Major Ashkani said through gritted teeth. He clutched the communicator in his hand tightly, but did not continue to issue orders. If you want to cause substantial damage to the mutant species in front of you, you may have to use heavy weapons that are prohibited from being used on the Ark. But if such weapons miss the mark even slightly, they will cause serious damage to the Ark itself. He knew in his heart that it was impossible for the superiors to approve this request. However, if he didn't use heavy weapons, he really didn't know how to fight this battle. With just these soldiers under his command, no matter how much he charged, he would just die. "Stay back," Victoria shouted sternly, and then she actually rushed towards the sumo wrestler alone. "Is she crazy? Is she going to die?" Major Ashkani exclaimed. He wanted to stop Victoria, but he couldn't move out. Of course Kaylan knew that Victoria was not seeking death, but he also didn't know what means this woman had to break through the living armor on the sumo wrestler's body. Victoria quickly closed the distance between her and the sumo wrestler. Just when she was about to hit the fat body, she kicked off the floor and jumped nearly 5 meters into the air. Kaylan only now knows that Victoria's legs have also undergone prosthetic transformation. If this burst of power is used in fighting, it can definitely kick a person's body into 2 pieces. With a stab, Victoria's trouser legs burst open instantly, and 2 nozzles hidden in the prosthetic limbs spit out cyan flames more than half a meter long. Without any help in mid-air, these 2 jets, the reaction force caused by the mouth, pushed her horizontally for several meters, causing her to land firmly on the sumo wrestler's shoulders. But before she could make any move, the tentacles on the mutated species quickly wrapped around her legs. Hundreds of smaller tentacles split off from those tentacles, moving inward along the gaps in the outer armor of the prosthetic limbs. "Drill away." On the side of the sumo wrestler's neck, 3 slits suddenly opened. In the 2 upper slits, 2 bloodshot eyeballs drilled out from the depths of the neck, protruding outwards, stretching the slits into it has a round shape, and from the crack at the lower end, a patch of fine fangs and a tentacle shaped like a tongue emerge. This is a face. A weird face grew out on the side of the sumo wrestler's neck, and it also showed a terrifying smile to Victoria. "Laugh, while you can still laugh now," Victoria said expressionlessly. She seemed to completely ignore the tentacles that penetrated into the prosthetic limbs, and just stared blankly at the face. Then, he raised his right hand. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen San. Chapter 194. Victoria's right hand is also a prosthetic leg, but inside this prosthetic leg, a miniature rocket thruster is actually inserted. The scorching tail flames spurted out from her elbow, and the 5 fingers joined together dug directly into the middle of the face. Then, the entire forearm was like a pile driver, driving towards the mutant's face one by one. It was nailed into the neck. As soon as the piercing whine sounded, Victoria's right hand crushed it in the mutant's throat. After the entire forearm was not inserted into the mutant's body, she cut off the legs and the space between the right arm and the torso. Connected, flipped backwards, and jumped off the mutant's body. Boom! 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 The dull explosions sounded one after another in the mutant's body. Not long after, the layer of living armor on the mutant's body began to show signs of disintegrating on its own, and those tentacles became transparent and rapidly shrunk in size. Some of the tentacles even melted directly into liquid and flowed down the round skin of the sumo wrestler. Several agents quickly stepped forward and snatched Victoria back from the ground, while another agent quickly took out a spare prosthetic leg and helped her put it on. "I didn't expect that my trump card would be used up so early," Victoria said as she looked at the mutant species that was dying. Although she still had a tone that was emotionless and so bland that it could even be described as indifferent, there was a hint of sigh in it. "The trump card, does it mean the forearm?" Kaylan asked. "No, it's the flesh-eating worm active cells in the forearm. In order to ensure that it can be killed in one blow, the filling amount inside is 35 times the normal dose," Victoria said. Are the active cells of flesh-eating worms very precious? I mean, is this kind of creature difficult to cultivate? Kaylan still remembers the eggshells he saw in the Abyss hatchery. If the eggshell is equivalent to one flesh-eating worm, there must be tens of millions of them. No, that's not right. If the content of that voice record is used as a statistical standard, the accurate number should be 640 million. Moreover, This is only the number of seedlings in the last experiment, including the previous 1,000. The total number of 750 failed experiments should be far higher than this number. It can be seen from this that flesh-eating worms should be an extremely easy to cultivate creature. It's not difficult to cultivate. Victoria moved her newly replaced right arm, then turned her head and stared directly at Kaylan. It's just that every available flesh-eating worm needs a living person as a cultivator container, and each container can only be used once. As for what the container looks like after use, I think you should have seen it. What she was referring to was naturally the priestess in the exile camp who was instantly sucked into a mummy. There is no doubt that these so-called cultivation containers are all consumables, and they are all disposable consumables. As for the source of these disposable consumables, I'm afraid they are only those death row inmates who have committed serious crimes. Can't it be cultivated in a culture tank that simulates the internal environment of the human body? Or use cloned organs, or use indigenous organisms as substitutes? You have to ask the people at the institute about your question. I can't answer you. Victoria shook her head. I'm just the person responsible for using it. Then, is there something that can replace the active cells, that can have an effect on the erosion seeds? It may be some kind of substance in the flesh-eating worm cells. If it can be extracted and analyzed. Kaylan asked tentatively. He suddenly felt that maybe it was the right choice to reveal the news about the stalagmites to Maginot. But the problem now was that he didn't know how to reach the desert island. Just with the help of the existing stone cones are definitely not as effective at dealing with erosion seeds as the flesh-eating worm active cells. After all, although the latter has a low yield, it can at least be cultivated. You have too many questions. Victoria glanced at Kaylan impatiently. I have already said that you should ask people at the institute for this kind of questions. Of course, the premise is that you must be qualified to enter. The entrance to the institute. Qualifications. Kaylan thought to himself that of course he was qualified to step into the door of the research institute. As long as he told all these secrets, it would not be easy to enter the research institute. However, he could get in. As for getting in, whether there will be a chance to come out later is another matter. Just when Kaylan was about to change the topic, a faint whimper suddenly reached his ears, making him shiver and the hairs on his back stand on end. Woo 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 woo. This voice seemed to be crying or saying something indistinctly. Kaylan wanted to identify the bites contained in the sobs, but the more he focused his attention, the more the sobs sounded. It became more and more erratic, and when he relaxed and tried to put himself in a trance, the source of the whimpering seemed to be right next to his ears. Have you heard any sounds deep in the street? Kaylan glanced at Major Ashkani and Victoria and asked in a low voice. Sound? What sound? Major Ashkani looked confused. No, did you hear something? Victoria turned her head, with a trace of suspicion in her eyes. It seems like crying. Kaylan made a silent gesture, put his hands next to his ears and listened carefully, but the whimpering sound suddenly disappeared, and there was only silence in the depths of the street. I didn't hear anything, Victoria said, including ultrasound and infrasound. It was eerily quiet in here. Could it be an hallucination? Major Ashkani also said at the side. Mr. Kaylan, you may be too nervous. Do you want to go to the back and take a rest first? It's not an illusion, I really heard it. Kaylan was sure that the whimpering sound did not come from the depths of his mind, but indeed came from the depths of this street. Oh. It's here again. I heard it. Kaylan was so excited that he ignored Major Ashkani's obstruction and quickly walked to the intersection of Kabukiko Ichiban Street and pointed inside and said, the cry was like that of a woman, or a child, very deep, with a nasal sound like inhalation. At this time, Victoria's body suddenly trembled. She frowned and turned her head slightly. I heard it too, but it wasn't crying, it was sharp screams. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen-Mi-San. Chapter 195. Sir Victoria, I seem to have heard screams. An agent next to him said cautiously. Did you hear anything? Kaylan patted Major Ashkani's arm. Okay, there seems to be some sound, but whether it is crying or screaming, I can't tell clearly, Ashkani said hesitantly. Why do I feel like this voice is getting farther and farther away? Victoria said with a frown. This is one of the few original human organs on her face. A deeply visible scar runs from her forehead to it goes down through the eyebrows and the bridge of the nose, and extends to the edge of the maxillary bone. Ran away. Major Ashkani looked at Victoria and then at Kaylan. Is it an illusion? I don't hear any sounds now, those sounds just now seemed like they had never appeared. Live the same. It's not an illusion. One person's words may be explained by auditory hallucinations, but we can't all have auditory hallucinations, Kaylan denied it. But, if there was a sound, why did Mr. Kaylan hear crying, but Commissioner Victoria heard a sharp scream? This doesn't make sense, Ashkani said. Perhaps it's because the structure of my sound receiving device is different from that of the human ear canal, Victoria asked suspiciously. She suddenly turned her head and looked at the agent who just said that she also heard the scream. You just heard what was that sound? Crying? Or screaming? It should have been a scream. No, it's not right. Looking back now, it sounds like crying. The agent pressed his forehead with his hand and said with a troubled expression. What on earth is that sound? Victoria asked again, slightly aggravating her tone. Sir. The agent said with a grimace, I really can't remember, that voice was very mysterious to begin with. I could hear it for a while and then not, and when I tried hard to listen, when it becomes clear, it disappears, and when I focus on other things, it gradually becomes clear again. Okay, I understand. Victoria waved her hand, interrupting him, and then looked at Kaylan. Are you sure what you heard was crying? Yes, it's a low cry. To be more precise, it should be a woman's whimpering. It's very hoarse. The sound I heard was completely different from what you described. It was a very sharp and harsh scream. The creature that made the sound seemed to be suffering great pain, although it was somewhat similar to crying, it was definitely not deep. Husky, Victoria said. Kaylan shrugged and said, I don't need to lie about this kind of thing. Also, have you discovered anything? What? After this mutant species, it has been a long time since a container has been attracted by pheromones and escaped. If the Arezaka Consortium has been controlled by that heretical section, the huge East 9 district, 160 with a permanent population of tens of thousands, there are not only 3 containers, right? What's more, Kaylan continued, let alone 3 such containers, if only one is thrown into a densely populated area, it can infect thousands of people. However, these people are all, where has it gone? Yeah, I have never been able to figure this out. Ashkani nodded repeatedly. Today is still the weekend, and it stands to reason that there will be a large number of tourists from outside the district coming here in Kabukicho Ichiban Street. But these people all disappeared within a few dozen minutes after the power outage. It's impossible that they were arrested by the Arezaka Consortium, right? I talked to General Maginot twice on the phone on the way here. As far as I know, not only in Kabukicho, but also in other neighborhoods, the garrison has not found even a single person who came from East Kowloon after the power outage. The people who ran out of the district, these people seem to have evaporated out of thin air at the moment the power was cut off. Kaylan took over Ashkani's words and said, I have a question about this, Ms. Victoria. Can you tell me the answer? You asked, Victoria said. The pheromones released by the flesh-eating worms can attract the seeds of erosion. So, is it possible for the container parasitized by the seeds of erosion to suppress this desire with its own will? The Security Bureau has conducted relevant experiments, And the answer is no. When the corrosive seeds in the body of the container receive the pheromones of the flesh-eating worms, they will immediately enter a period of rapid transformation and eat away the self of the container itself. Consciousness then drives the vessel to rush desperately to the source of the pheromone, Victoria replied. Then there are only two possibilities, in the entire East 9 district, within the range that the flesh-eating worm pheromones can reach, only these three containers, or, only these three containers have the ability to move freely, while other containers were imprisoned by physical means. Confining a large number of containers and then waiting for the right time to release them all at once, if they are allowed to break through the blockade, the consequences will be really disastrous. Victoria thought for a moment and then made a decision. You guys stay here, I will take my people to investigate the situation first. If we fail to come out after an hour, we will immediately send this thing to anyone in the Security Bureau, an intelligence officer. She took out a memory card from her pocket and threw it to Major Ashkani. What is this? The Major asked subconsciously. The battle record just now and the recording between me and this person. Victoria pointed at Kaylan. Although I can't guarantee that the people above will believe what he said as much as I do, I must at least make them aware of the problem. Severity. I want to go in with you at this moment. Kaylan suddenly stood up and said. What did you say? Victoria's eyes showed a trace of surprise. You should know how dangerous it is here. I know, that's why I want to go in, Kaylan said. Although he didn't know how to explain it to Victoria and the others, he seemed to hear a hint of pleading in the faint whimper just now. The voice is asking for help. And the most important point is that in this weird sobbing, Kaylan didn't feel any hostility at all. As a hunter, when exploring ruins, you often have to face many choices. When reason cannot weigh the pros and cons of the choices, you have to rely on human intuition, and Kaylan has always trusted his own intuition. However, according to some scholars who study this kind of theory, this ability cannot be simply summarized by the word intuition. They have created a brand new term for this, inspiration. This inspiration does not refer to the kind of inspiration that bursts out during literary and artistic creation, but is used to describe human beings' sensitive ability to perceive strange phenomena. This ability is closer to the supersensory perception of the sixth sense. But compared to the erratic sixth sense, this ability is triggered more frequently. Generally speaking, hunters with high inspiration are more likely to find hidden secret passages and treasures with high value than hunters with low inspiration, but this does not mean that high inspiration is necessarily a good thing. Hunters with high inspiration, in the ruins, it is also easier to encounter those unexplainable evil phenomena. If you are not careful, you may step into a situation of death and no life. Moreover, the higher the inspiration, the easier it is to be confused by some illusions, and the easier it is to have a mental breakdown and fall into madness. Kaylan belongs to the type of people with relatively high inspiration, especially after coming into contact with the inscriptions on the sarcophagus and inheriting the language of the Alpha civilization. He always has an illusion that the relationship between himself and the human race is the distance seemed to be getting farther and farther, and sometimes he even felt that the language of the Alpha civilization was more like his mother tongue than the human language. And this time, his intuition has been vaguely telling him that the creature whimpering deep in the East 9th district is not his enemy, and will not cause any harm to him. Although Kaylan himself knew that this knowledge was extremely outrageous, the hint from his subconscious was so strong that he could not stop himself from wanting to enter the East 9th district. Mr. Kaylan. This is too dangerous. If General Maginot knows, he will definitely stop you. Ashkani hurriedly dissuaded Kaylan when he heard that he wanted to follow the agents into the East 9th district. But the voice I heard is obviously different from all of you, Kaylan said. I think this question can only be answered by myself going in. It's not worth risking your life for an answer, Victoria said indifferently. That's right, the agents of the Security Bureau are all elites with professional level training. They have rich experience in handling this kind of thing, but we are different, Mr. Kaylan. If you insist on finding out, I think it's better to wait until the order from above for the large troops to move in is issued before going in. There are more people and it is safer, Major Ashkani said. I'm afraid that everything will be too late by then. Kaylan suddenly lowered his voice and said, since Major, you are considered General Maginot's confidant, then, you should know about Leviathan's affairs, right? Kaylan knew that inspiration and intuition alone would not be able to convince Ashkani and Maginot, but apart from this, he had another reason, which was enough for them to let him enter Dongju district. Ashkani was startled again. I do know about Leviathan, but this and now. If the commander of the First Fleet hesitated at that time and did not command the flagship to crash into Leviathan, but decided to wait for the arrival of several other fleets before conducting encirclement and suppression operations. Kaylan paused. Then I'm afraid what we have to consider now is not the East 9th District. Why? Major Ashkani was a little confused. Although he had read the relevant reports on the Leviathan incident, he certainly didn't know as many details as Kaylan, who had experienced it. Because as long as the First Fleet hesitates, what we will face may be a fully resurrected Leviathan. Major Ashkani opened his mouth slightly, but couldn't say a word for a while. And now, I suspect that the sound I heard and the sound Ms. Victoria heard came from the same source. If the Arezaka Consortium really intends to gather the containers of erosion seeds to attack the blockade, then it is very likely that more than one gathering point has been set up. If we miss one of them, imagine, Major, the scene of thousands of containers tearing open the blockade and pouring into neighboring residential areas. Okay, Major Ashkani seemed to have made some important decision in his heart. He made a fist with his right hand and beat his chest hard. Since Mr. Kaylan is willing to take risks for the sake of the people, then we will definitely protect your safety. Do you want to come in with me too? Kaylan was stunned for a moment and asked. Of course. As he said that, Ashkani selected a dozen non-commissioned officers and equipped each of them with a syringe gun and a syringe containing flesh-eating worm active cells to form an elite team. In addition, he transferred 2 more bloodhound mechas from the rear. Together with the previous 4, a total of 6 mechas were also incorporated into the team. As a result, the size of this team suddenly became bloated. In addition to Kaylan, Ashkani, and Victory, there were also 14 agents from the Security Bureau, and the garrison 16 sergeants, plus 6 mechas, including the operators inside the mechas. The number is already more than twice that of the previous reconnaissance team. As for the firepower configuration, the firepower of this team even surpassed the troops remaining on the blockade. Hurry up, we have to go, Victoria urged, and she jumped onto the leading bloodhound and used the hooks of the leg prostheses to firmly fix herself on the top of the mecha. Kaylan asked for an extra syringe gun from an agent, and pressed the active cells given to him by Zofia into the launch slot. He just inserted the syringe into his side pocket. Turning around, he saw Major Ashkani quickly crossing himself on his chest. Major, are you religious? Well, I am a Christian, although there are not many people who believe in the religion of the old times these days. My father and grandfather are both devout believers. Of course I also know that God does not actually exist. But when I'm nervous, I can't help but pray, Major Ashkani replied. Then just think of it as praying to your father and grandfather, they will bless you. Kaylan patted his shoulder. Besides, I have reservations about the existence of God. Do you believe that God really exists in this world? I don't know, but the Alpha civilization seems to be very pious to their gods, Kaylan said. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chenmi San. Chapter 196. The first exploration target of the investigation team was the Kyoto-style teppanyaki restaurant 150 meters away from the street entrance. The second container just now, that is, the little girl whose head was trampled. He jumped out of the second-floor window of the teppanyaki restaurant. Victoria believes that since they don't have any clues at the moment, they might as well follow the routes that these containers rushed out of, and maybe they can find some valuable clues. This is a 3-story Japanese-style building. The main body of the building is made of a polymer that imitates solid wood. Red lanterns using electricity as lighting energy and imitation solid wood signs with the store name and special dishes are hung under the eaves. On the signboard, next to the shoe cabinet, stands a statue of a geisha wearing a kimono and a traditional Japanese bun. However, this is actually a cleverly disguised surveillance device. The camera lens is embedded between the statue's hollowed-out eyes. And at the neck of the statue, there are also mechanical joints that can be used to adjust the angle. The first floor of the building is a chain brand izakaya. When the door curtain is opened, there is a narrow corridor leading directly to the bar. The two sides of the corridor are divided into several small private rooms. An agent holding a shield entered the corridor first. His boots stepped on the tatami mat made of artificial fiber. As soon as he stepped on it, the thick blood was squeezed out from the gaps in the rattan. Obviously, there was a massacre here not long ago. However, this did not surprise everyone. They could smell the strong smell of blood at the door of the izakaya, and the tatami mats on the ground were stained dark brown because they were full of blood. It's just that the only problem is that there is no body, Kaylan said silently to himself. This scene reminded him of the mining base on Leviathan's back that was attacked by monsters. There was also a mess but no discovery. Half a corpse. It was not until later that they learned that those corpses were used as nourishment for Leviathan's resurrection. The leading agent opened the box doors on both sides. Kaylan noticed that there were still uneaten roasted birds and sashimi on the table in the box, and there was even a half cup in the cup next to it. Remaining wine. Only the tatami at the door of the box was stained with blood, while the area near the inside was relatively clean. As for the walls and furniture, there were no traces of damage. There was no fighting in the box. All the blood flowed from the innermost part. Victoria's judgment was basically the same as Ian's idea. Moreover, judging from the neatly arranged tableware, those guests should be taking their time. They left the box, but the key to the problem lies in what happened after they left the box. Sir, look at this, an agent suddenly pointed at the fire box embedded in the corridor wall. The glass on the front of the box had been smashed, but the fire hose and fire extinguisher inside were still in place. Only the fire axe on the shelf was missing. The axe was taken away. Could it be that someone resisted? Major Ashkani said. But Victoria just nodded and signaled the team to continue advancing. At the end of the corridor is the lobby and cooking area of this izakaya, but it is dark inside at the moment, with only the strong smell of blood still wafting out from inside. The agent at the front took out a lighting stick, lit it and threw it in. Suddenly, the entire lobby was enveloped in the faint fluorescence emitted by the lighting stick. No body was found, and the dining table, bar, cooking area, and kitchen were all the same, the leading agent reported. Kaylan followed Victoria into the lobby and saw that the tatami mats on the lobby floor were also full of blood, but unlike the private rooms, the walls, tables, and chairs here were also stained with large amounts of blood. Uneaten food and bowls and chopsticks were scattered on the ground, and the ingredients on the barbecue grill had turned into pitch black charcoal. Kaylan bent down and picked up a shoe from the ground. It was a high-heeled women's shoe, size 36. The surface material was a high-grade artificial leather, and there were rhinestones embedded on the upper for decoration, but the heel of the shoe was broken, and the leather surface of the toe had serious scratches. Kaylan still remembers the sign hanging outside this izakaya saying that customers need to take off their shoes before entering the store, and the shoe cabinet at the door is specially used to store the shoes taken off by customers, but now this only high heels appeared in the lobby, which made Kaylan feel a little strange. These are obviously not the shoes of the izakaya staff. The staff here are either barefoot or wear socks like foot bags. High heels like this, which can easily damage the tatami, will never be allowed to be worn in the store. The shoe could only have come from an outsider, and she only walked into this izakaya after the power outage. As for the worn toe cap and broken heel, it shows that the owner of the shoe was in a panic mood at the time, Or maybe he was forcibly brought to this izakaya. That's wrong. Why is the situation of the owner of the shoes completely opposite to that of the guests in the box? As if he remembered something, Kaylan suddenly patted Victoria on the shoulder and said, "Follow me, there was a clue in the box that we missed just now." "What clue?" There was a trace of confusion in Victoria's eyes, but she still followed Kaylan into the nearest box. "These foods." Kaylan picked up the plate from the box table and handed it to Victoria. "What's wrong with these foods?" "Is there something wrong with them?" Victoria picked up a piece of sashimi from the plate and observed it carefully. "Do you want me to ask someone to test these foods?" "No, there is no need for testing at all." Kaylan also picked up a piece of fish sashimi and tore it gently, revealing all the tender meat fibers. "These are genuine fish, although among the three kinds of meat, I can only tell it's tuna. The other two types of meat are sea bream and amberjack, both of which are the most suitable materials for making sashimi." Victoria added, "What's wrong? Is there any problem with this?" "Of course there is a problem, it's a big problem." Kaylan was still holding the piece of tuna sashimi in his hand. "I'm not sure about the salary and benefits of the Security Bureau, but do you think ordinary residents in the East 9 district can afford it? Can you afford this kind of thing?" Kaylan put down the plate and continued, "Let alone ordinary residents of the East 9th District, even a senior employee of the Arezaka Consortium, the salary is definitely not enough for him to consume this level of sashimi, especially this type of sashimi. There are not many rare fish from the old era on the Ark, and the meat on each one is auctioned off by Lunk." Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chenmi-san. Chapter 197. "You mean, the guests drinking in the box have unusual identities?" Victoria reacted immediately. "More than ordinary." Kaylan walked to the sliding door of the box. There were several obvious bump marks on the door frame about 30 centimeters from the ground. He squatted down and gently touched these marks with his fingers. Stroking it, although there are many ways to cause such marks, in this place, combined with the identity of the drinkers, these bumps should be caused by the katana scabbards they tied around their waists. Speaking of samurai knife, Ms. Victoria, what did you think of Arezaka Samurai Club? Victoria still looked expressionless, but there was a hint of surprise in her eyes. This izakaya is obviously one of the gathering places for members of the Samurai Club. Only people with the status of club members can enjoy the precious fish that is priced by the gram. Not long ago, a group of members of the Arezaka Samurai Club, they were sitting in this box drinking, and they knew in advance that the power outage was about to happen, so when all the lights went out, they didn't panic at all, and they could even calmly place their chopsticks on the chopstick holder. "Then what?" Victoria stared at Kaylan and asked. "These people should have been assigned corresponding tasks by the Arezaka Consortium, or the heretical section. I think gathering the people on the streets of East 9th District should be part of these people's tasks," Kaylan said. "After all, this matter must have been planned by them for a long time, and it is actually normal to have such an arrangement. So, what's their purpose in rounding up civilians?" "I don't know. Maybe those civilians are up there." Kaylan raised his head, and a drop of half-coagulated blood fell from the ceiling, landing on the valuable plate of sea bream in the middle of the table. "Fish bone on the body." "No body was found in the izakaya on the first floor. The blood stains all leaked from the Kyoto-style teppanyaki restaurant on the second floor. And the little girl who was made into a container also jumped out from the second floor." "Go to the second floor." Victoria made a decision immediately. "The stairs leading to the second floor are located at the end of the aisle between the kitchen and the bathroom. The stairs are also made of the kind of polymer that imitates solid wood. They are covered with dark red carpets, and on the handrails of the stairs, there are quite a few nail scratches left. It seems that those people were dragged up by force," Kaylan whispered to Victoria. "As for the people who dragged them up, they should be those guys from the Samurai Club." "Those people shouldn't be still upstairs, right?" Major Ashkani asked uneasily. "Probably not." Victoria shook her head. In order to absorb enough nutrients, the erosion seeds in the rapid transformation stage will attack all living creatures inside without distinction. If the container had been staying on the second floor before, if so, there shouldn't be anyone alive on the second floor. I think, it's better to be careful. Major Ashkani held the pistol tightly with both hands, and put his thumb on the safety device above the grip. This made Kaylan secretly complain, wait a minute, if there is an emergency, this guy shouldn't accidentally fire and injure one of his own. The team climbed up the stairs. Just when the agent holding the shield at the front was eye level with the ground on the second floor, he suddenly raised his hand to signal the people behind him to stop. "What's wrong?" Victoria asked immediately. "Corpses, so many corpses." There was a tremor in the agent's voice. "Have you found any threatening targets?" Victoria was not too surprised. She had already been mentally prepared for the worst situation on the second level. And filling an entire floor with corpses is actually not the worst case scenario. At least the corpse poses no threat to the living. Not yet. The agent put down his arm, continued to climb up, climbed the last few steps, squatted down at the entrance of the second floor, and put the pistol with a tactical flashlight on the shield. The agent following him lit up the two lighting rods again and threw them into the distance. No threatening targets were found. Victory, he and Kaylan followed the leading agents and climbed to the second floor. Under the light of the lighting rod, hundreds of corpses could be vaguely seen stacked on the ground. These corpses all had an obvious sign. Features: their fingers have all been cut off, their arms are crossed in front of their chests in a cross shape, and their bare palms are resting on their shoulders. This look is similar to the way the pharaohs of ancient Egypt were buried in the old era. The posture is exactly the same. "It's a sacrifice, these people are sacrifices," Victoria whispered. "Sacrifice? What are sacrifices?" "These corpses," Major Ashkani on the side couldn't help but ask. His legs were shaking slightly. Fortunately, the trembling was not large, and the environment was very dark. The people around did not notice. Well, Victoria pulled out a lighting rod and threw it towards the pile of corpses. "This is an extremely cruel ritual of the heretical section. They use living people as sacrifices to the great god they call them. Pray to seek the so-called protection and blessing of gods. Living sacrifices." Kaylan silently repeated the word. He had read in books that in the barbaric period on Earth, it was very common to use humans as living sacrifices for sacrifices, but later, with the advent of civilization, with the development of human civilization, human sacrifice has gradually been regarded as an extremely barbaric and bloody thing. Except for some uncivilized areas, most countries on the Earth rarely perform human sacrifice after entering the feudal era. But now, on this arc, which symbolizes the pinnacle achievement of human civilization, human sacrifice has appeared again. I have seen several heretical sects use living people as sacrifices for prayer ceremonies, but they were all outside the ark, and the sacrifices were all slaves who were dying," said the previous one. The agent, who also heard the voice, said to Kaylan and Ashkani, "But I have never seen a human sacrifice on this scale. Generally speaking, this kind of prayer ceremony requires only 2 sacrifices. It's enough for 3 people. 300 human sacrifices. I think what they want to pray to that god must be a very big event, right?" Kaylan whispered. "Let's not talk about it for now," Victoria waved her hand. "A group will test the corpses to see if there are any corpses infected with seed of corrosion cells. The container jumped out from this place. All the corpses here are. There is a high risk of infection." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen-Mi-san. Chapter 198. 300 corpses were crammed into such a small space. The strong smell of blood and corpse odor even gave Kaylan the illusion that even the air had become very viscous and difficult to flow. Every breath, you have to suppress the desire to vomit. In such a scene opposite, the agents of the Security Bureau performed fairly well, but the non-commissioned officers of the garrison who came in with Major Ashkani were all pale, and some of them who had more serious reactions were already covering their heads. His mouth kept retching. 10 minutes later. Sir, no infection has been found, but what? Victoria glanced at him coldly and asked. When we conducted a sample autopsy, we found that the inside of the skull of the corpse was empty. The agent said. Kond, are you saying that the brain tissue of the corpse has disappeared? Kaylan asked quickly. He knew that there is an indigenous creature called brain-eating worm, which especially likes to feed on the brain tissue of living things. Of course, this brain-eating worm has nothing to do with the amoeba on Earth named Naegleria fowleri. This is a giant worm with a length of more than 5 meters and a bloated body. It will release a gas that puts the prey into a hallucinogenic state, and then use a sharp needle-like mouthpart to pierce the skull of the prey and suck out the brain. However, brain-eating worms are almost considered a rare species on Alpha Planet, let alone on the Ark. They are hard to find even outside. Are there any signs of damage to the skull? Victoria asked. No, the agent shook his head, but after the autopsy, we found that there was a puncture wound on the top wall of the nasal cavity, and the brain tissue should have been removed from the nasal cavity. Puncturing the nasal cavity to remove brain tissue, isn't this the method used by the ancient Egyptians in the Old Era when making mummies? Coupled with the posture of the arms of these corpses, could it be that this heretical sect not only inherited the religion of the Alpha civilization, but also absorbed part of the ancient Egyptian culture that was handed down? But, what's the point of doing this? Has all the cadaver brain tissue been removed? Victoria continued to ask. All 16 corpses sampled were like this, the agent replied. Victoria fell into rare silence, and the atmosphere in the room suddenly became more solemn. Have you found these missing brains? Kaylan asked the agent. No, he shook his head and held up a transparent Ziploc bag. We only found the chopped off fingers of the victims. There were more than a dozen bloody fingers in the bag, and the cut section was not smooth. Obviously, the murderers first killed all the civilians who gathered here, and then cut them off with blunted samurai swords. The fingers came down one by one. This group of thugs. Major Ashkani gritted his teeth and said angrily, their crimes are enough to be sent to the electric chair a dozen times. There are currently 3 main methods of execution in Ark: injection, shooting and electric chair. The electric chair can be regarded as the most painful one, and will cause the body of the death row prisoner to be severely burned, making the appearance of the death penalty extremely disgraceful. Generally speaking, it is said that only prisoners who have committed extremely serious crimes will be sentenced to death by electric chair. Of course, since Kaylan knew how the flesh-eating worms of the Security Bureau were cultivated, in his eyes, the electric chair was no longer the most cruel punishment. The electric chair is cheaper than these guys. I think it is more suitable to send it to a breeding ground for flesh-eating worms. At least it can be used as waste. Kaylan glanced at the hands in the bags and said softly. The people from the second group will stay and count the detailed numbers of the victims and their specific identities. The others will follow me. After Victoria finished speaking, she actually took the lead to walk up to the 3rd floor. The agent holding the shield tried to get in front of her, but she pushed him away. Based on my experience of following the commander for so many years, she should be in anger now. The talkative agent whispered to Kaylan and Ashkani, I suggest you not to go at this time. Provoke her. Kaylan nodded in agreement. During this period of time together, his view of these security agents had changed a lot. At least, they were not as unbearable as the rumors outside said. There is an attic on the 3rd floor of the building, which is used as a warehouse by the operators of restaurants and izakayas. In addition to half a processed tuna and a dozen boxes of Japanese sake found in the freezer, they were piled here. The things inside were basically worthless debris, and as for things like corpses, not a single one was seen. The massacre and sacrifice seemed to have been completed in the restaurant on the second floor. During the process, no one ran up to the attic. After coming to this conclusion, the investigation team evacuated the building, but just as they were about to continue moving along the street, the voice that had disappeared for a while actually appeared again. I heard it clearly," Major Ashkani shouted incoherently. It was a scream. An extremely sharp scream. There seemed to be the sound of a blade piercing the flesh, and, wailing, crying and roaring. He covered his head and squatted down, his lips trembling. These sounds, are like the scene of more than 300 people being killed replaying in my ears. Ashkani murmured. He pulled off his general's hat and dug his fingers deeply into it. Into the hair. You're too nervous, breathe, take a deep breath. Kaylan grabbed the major's arm and lifted him up from the ground. The massacre continues. Ashkani's eyes widened, he grabbed Kayan's wrist tightly and shook it vigorously. The massacre is over. Kaylan patted the other party's back gently. He naturally heard the voice, but it was completely different from what Major Ashkani heard. It seemed to be a long and heavy prayer. The prayer spit out every syllable from his lips and teeth in an extremely pious tone. Kaylan could be sure that it was definitely not the language of the Alpha civilization, but it was also not any of the old era languages used by the humans on the Ark. Even he, the successor, could not understand the content of this prayer at all. Not only Ashkani, but several people in the investigation team also suffered from splitting headaches. They all heard similar sounds. The roars and screams of the victims seemed to be ringing in their ears. Even the sound of flesh being penetrated by a sharp weapon is so real. Did you hear it too? Kaylan raised his head and looked at Victoria. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chenmi-san. Chapter 199. I heard, the content is similar to what Major Ashkani described, except that I also heard a sound mixed in with this sound, Victoria said solemnly, with a thoughtful look on her brows. The sound mixed in? What is it? Kaylan couldn't help but ask. It seemed like a deep male voice was reciting, but I couldn't hear clearly what he was reciting. It seemed like a long poem. I could feel the rhyme and rhythm, but I couldn't tell it from the ambiguous pronunciation. Come up with specific words, Victoria said. Reciting, I think it's more like praying, although I can't hear what he's saying clearly. Kaylan expressed his thoughts. When you say it like that, it does sound a bit like praying. Then the source of this voice is the host of this human sacrifice. We can't be sure about this. After all, we don't know whether these voices are previous recordings, or... He glanced at Major Ashkarni, whose mood had stabilized, and then said to Victoria with lip language, that's what's happening now. It only took more than 10 seconds from the sound of these sounds to the disappearance of them, but everyone in the team felt as if they had witnessed a massacre by a heretical section. Some of the people in the most serious condition even showed signs of collapse, and the shirt on Ashkani's chest and back was completely soaked with cold sweat. Kaylan took out his mobile phone, and when the sound just sounded, he immediately turned on the recording function of his mobile phone. The total recording duration was 13 seconds. He turned the volume on his phone to the maximum and clicked the play button. There was no sound. Except for the voices of the team members, the phone did not record any sounds. After using audio processing software to remove those human voices, only 13 seconds of silence remained in the entire recording. It seems that only we can hear these sounds, and what everyone hears seems to be a little different, Kaylan said. Maybe this is not a sound, but a special kind of radio wave. Victoria put her fingers on her temples and said with her eyes closed, it is not our ears that receive them, but the brain. It's just that the brain, this radio wave was converted into neural signals that acted on the auditory system, so I could hear those sounds. Thanks for being a senior commissioner of the Security Bureau. He actually thinks exactly the same as me. Kaylan nodded repeatedly, but was glared at by Victoria fiercely. Her eyes seemed to be questioning him, is this sentence a compliment to me or not? Are you praising yourself? The second destination of the investigation team was the alley where the mutant, the giant sumo wrestler, came out. There were originally many light boxes and vending machines at the entrance of the alley, but now these things have been reduced to fragments all over the ground. Not only that, even the buildings on both sides of the street have been severely crushed and damaged. This alley is only 4 to 5 meters wide in total. The fact that the meatball can squeeze through here is indeed a bit beyond everyone's expectations. According to the map data, there is a sumo club under the name of the Arezaka Foundation deep in the alley. The official registered name is Yoshida Sumo Club House, and the person in charge is Yoda Yoshida, a senior employee of the Arezaka Foundation. It is the only sumo club on Ichiban Street in Kabukicho, so the mutants should have escaped from this place. The person responsible for searching for information happened to be the agent who talked a lot. In the previous conversation, Kaylan already knows his name, Alyosha. Like Ivan, he is also a Russian, but he claims that he cannot speak Russian at all. On the contrary, he has a good command of Chinese and English. And Sukabul and Ula are the only two Russian words he can speak. Pay attention to the buildings on both sides of the street. The terrain here is too complex and it is easy to be ambushed, Victoria said, letting the garrison's bloodhound Mecha enter the alley first, but because the roads available for passage were very difficult, Victoria said, it is too narrow, and the original parallel formation of two mechas can only be changed to an inline formation. However, if there is a sudden battle, it will be difficult for the firepower between several mechas to take care of each other. I always feel that something is wrong with this place. Kaylan said to Alyosha, your boss is right, this terrain is perfect for an ambush. If there is any emergency, you won't be able to retreat even if you want to. Sir, she has cracked many traps set by heretical sections since she thinks there is no problem, nothing will happen, Alyosha said. Not only him, but also the agents of the Security Bureau seemed to have a certain attitude towards Victoria. With almost blind trust, Kaylan felt that if Victoria ordered them to die, they would execute it without hesitation. There shouldn't be anyone in these rooms. After experiencing the incident just now, Major Ashkani was obviously in a low mood. I don't know if they will be alive or dead. And the performance of the non-commissioned officers of the garrison is simply far behind that of the agents, even though they can be regarded as the elite in the garrison. After all, the actual combat they have experienced is still too few, and I have never seen a scene of human sacrifice like the one just now, Kaylan thought to herself. Rather than let this kind of troops be responsible for this matter, it would be better to dispatch a field force here. Those who are used to seeing killings, the soldiers' mental endurance is not the least bit strong. One group and two groups dispersed, with 3 people as a unit, and they inspected the buildings on both sides one by one. If necessary, they were allowed to fire freely. Groups 3 and 4 paid attention to monitoring the surrounding environment. Victoria stood at the front of the team with the blood-seeking hound on his head, giving orders to his subordinates. Here, the electromagnetic interference is already very strong. Not only are communications with the blockade blocked, but even remote control equipment such as drones have malfunctioned. They lost control within a few meters of flying and crashed into pieces. On the eaves. The smell of blood here seems to have become very light, Kaylan sniffed. He began to miss the old dog a little. If he were here, the progress of the tracking mission should be much smoother. Yeah, Victoria responded coldly. This is a good thing, at least it means that there is no such crazy human sacrifice happening here, Alyosha said. Kaylan noticed that when he mentioned the words human sacrifice, the corners of Major Ashkani's eyes twitched involuntarily. The scene, like a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, was probably already in the young officer's mind. It left a shadow in my heart that was hard to shake off. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Enchenmi-san. Chapter 201. Such behavior as heretical sects can be said to have broken through the bottom line of human beings. After seeing the sacrificial scene in the restaurant, Kaylan no longer intended to regard these guys as his own kind. In more than 2 minutes, the team only advanced less than 100 meters. Just when Kaylan thought that he should speed up a little, Victoria, who was squatting and being stared at by the bloodhound, suddenly stood up. Facing a grocery store on the right side of the street 20 meters ahead, he shouted sharply, "Come out! Otherwise I will order incendiary bombs to be thrown into the building where you are hiding." As a high-level transformer, with the help of detection equipment directly connected to the body, Victoria's perception ability can be regarded as the strongest in the team. When she heard what she said, the agents aimed their guns at her. The front entrance of that grocery store. Crunch. The antique-style fence door was gently pushed open, and a man in a floor-length black robe slowly walked out. There is no doubt that this is a believer of a heretical sect, but I don't know what his rank is in the sect. This black robe is covered with strange patterns, and you can tell at a glance that this person is definitely not one of the most popular. Ordinary believers at the bottom. The man in black robe walked to the middle of the street, facing Kaylan and the others. He slowly raised his arms to the height of his shoulders, with his palms facing up and his 10 fingers stretched straight. "What is he doing?" Kaylan murmured in his heart. He subconsciously glanced at Victoria standing on the mecha. In the latter's vigilant eyes, he caught a trace of doubt. Obviously, for this black-robed man, there should be no relevant intelligence from the Security Bureau regarding the actions taken. No one knew what this heretical sect member in black robe wanted to do. This action can't possibly be surrendering to them. More than half of the weapons in the team were aimed at his vital points. With just one order from Victoria, the man in black robe would be blasted to the point where not even a scrap would be left. At this moment, the man in black robe spoke. His lips moved slightly, but he did not spit even half a syllable. "What does he seem to be saying?" Elisha whispered, "but I can't hear what he is saying at all." Of course you can't hear it, Kaylan thought to himself, because what this man in black robe speaks is clearly the language of Alpha civilization. This is the fourth human being that Kaylan knows so far who can use the language of Alpha civilization. Apart from him and the successor who founded the heretical sect, the other one is the one who sacrificed himself in the exile camp. Sacrificed to the messenger of the prophet of the seed of corrosion. Could it be that the man in black robes in front of me is also a messenger of the prophet? But Kaylan soon discovered that this man in black robe did not seem to be proficient in the language of Alpha civilization. He kept repeating the same few sentences, and his reading was very difficult, as if he was learning babbling. Like young children. The general meaning of these sentences was not far from what Kaylan saw on the broken stone tablet. At this moment, Major Ashkani suddenly exclaimed, You, look at his face." The face of the man in black robe was not covered. It was the face of a young yellow man with no notable features. He was not handsome, but he could not be said to be ugly either. If he were to replace his dirty black robe, if he were to put him into an ordinary company employee uniform and then throw him into a morning train filled with office workers, he would hardly attract anyone's attention. But as he continued to recite those few prayers, his face was aging rapidly. The originally plump skin gradually became shriveled, a large number of wrinkles and age spots appeared on his face, and his eye sockets then he sunk deeply, and his eyes became even more cloudy. It only took a few seconds, but to him it seemed like decades had passed. At this time, another mechanical voice sounded deep in Ian's brain. The servant of the god can temporarily grant the use of part of the holy word to his dependents, but in exchange for the price, he must be used by the servant of the god or his dependents. When these holy words pray directly to the great god for a gift, they must devote their life force equal to the power of the gift. This passage comes from the information left by Alpha civilization. Although it sounds mysterious, it is not difficult to understand literally, especially in light of the situation at hand. Servants of God should refer to the Alpha people or the successors of Alpha civilization, and the so-called holy word should refer to the language of Alpha civilization mastered by Kaylan and the founder of the heretical section. This kind of language ability can be temporarily transferred to other people, but whether they are servants or servants' dependents, they must use this ability at the cost of their own lifespan. Wait, Kaylan suddenly realized that there was something difficult to explain in this piece of information. If using the holy word requires a cost of life, then he has used this ability more than once. Why does he seem to no impact? If using the language of Alpha civilization requires lifespan, it would be impossible for this civilization to develop, and these ruins on this planet should not exist. No. No, that shouldn't be the case. I understood it wrong from the beginning. Holy word should not generally refer to the language of Alpha civilization, but to certain specific prayer words. Only when these prayer words are used will the user's vitality be depleted. As for the role of these holy words, they use their lifespan to exchange for gifts from some great god. So, what is this gift? Soon, Kaylan found the answer. The man in black robe, who had aged to the point of dying, suddenly trembled. His skin, hair, and flesh were rapidly decaying, and his organs and intestines, which had lost their support, fell to the ground. In less than 10 seconds, he was wrapped in a black robe. All that was left inside was a pitch-black skeleton. The dark skeleton. Kaylan reacted immediately and hurriedly shouted to Victoria, "Be careful. He is not dead." "This skeleton is what you encountered in the cargo hold of the Pioneer icebreaker, right?" Victoria asked. "What happened in the cargo hold after the Soma Consortium sent the sample of the black skeleton to the Research Institute?" The battle was no longer a secret, and the Security Bureau naturally obtained relevant information as soon as possible. Yes, Kaylan nodded. "This thing is extremely maneuverable and difficult to deal with, especially in a place like this." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chenmi-san. Chapter 202. Everyone, concentrate on me, defend the advancing formation. Before Victoria could say the word shaped in formation, the black skeleton rushed towards a Security Bureau agent on the outside of the team. The agent's reaction was not slow. The moment the black skeleton exploded, he had already pulled the trigger of the automatic pistol. In an instant, all the bullets were fired out like water. However, the result he achieved was it only tore up the robe wrapped around the black skeleton, but failed to cause any effective damage to the skeleton itself. The black skeleton crashed into the agent's arms in the blink of an eye. The sharp bone claws left several deep wounds on his thighs. Then, it threw the injured agent towards everyone in the team. He came over and ducked into the nearest room. A skilled agent immediately rushed forward and dragged his companion back, while the others fired wildly at the room, trying to suppress the black skeleton hiding inside with firepower. Leg, my leg. Ah! The agent who was attacked wailed in pain, until the agent who rescued him inserted a quick-acting painkiller into his leg. On his arms, he stopped screaming and started breathing heavily. No alienated cells were found in the wound, ruling out the risk of infection from the erosion seed. The rescue agent quickly checked his wound and reported to Victoria, but the opponent's bone claws contain a special toxin that can accelerate the wound festers and the sensitivity of the pain nerves is greatly enhanced. No wonder. Kaylan nodded silently. Agents like these from the Security Bureau have received extremely strict training. Training content such as enduring pain is the basis of the basics, let alone just a few there were scratches. Even if his entire leg was cut off, he wouldn't be able to scream so loudly, but if this toxin can amplify the pain several times or even dozens of times, no matter how strong-willed he is, it's impossible for a person to remain silent, unless he faints from pain. Carry the injured to the middle of the team and deal with the emergency first. Others keep an eye on the target, Victoria shouted, and she herself had already jumped to the roof of the building with the help of the explosive power of the mechanical prosthesis. She held a powerful electromagnetic heavy machine gun in her hand and fired at her feet. Suddenly, a large hole with a diameter of 3 meters was cut on the roof, and Victoria fell directly into the house through this hole. The target is not inside. It ran away, Victoria's voice came from inside the house. At this time, a scream suddenly came from the other side of the team. When everyone turned around, they happened to see the black skeleton. They turned to the back of a mobile cold drink shop, leaving a garrison sergeant lying on the ground with his abdominal cavity cut open by bone claws. "Hurry up and save him," Kaylan shouted to the stunned soldiers on the side, "be careful not to step on his intestines. That thing is behind here. Kill it." Ashkani suddenly seemed to be a different person. He roared and rushed towards the cold drink shop. He pulled the trigger as he rushed. The cold drink shop contained soda and alcoholic drinks. The can was suddenly blown into pieces. However, the walls of this cold drink shop were made of thin, detachable boards. The bullets easily penetrated the back wall and made several large holes in it. "It's still there." Major Ashkani seemed to have left the terror behind him at this moment. He dropped the empty assault rifle, pulled out his pistol and went into the cold drink shop, facing the black man hiding behind the wall. The skeleton fires repeatedly. "Major, get back. Your weapons can't hurt it," Kaylan shouted. He had already experienced the physical strength of the black skeleton in the cargo hold of the Pioneer. That thing can, even after dozens of head-to-head fights with Akira Asano's Nino alloy blade, it was impossible for conventional ammunition to penetrate that layer of bone. The pistol used by Ashkarni is a large-caliber revolver model Defender R05. This gun can kill a cow with one shot at a distance of 100 meters, but the only drawback is that it has a small amount of ammunition. There are only 4 bullets in a magazine. Just as Ashkani was reloading, the black skeleton seized the opportunity and crawled through the hole in the wall panel, and its bone claws like military thorns swung down. Bang! At this critical moment, a light gray grenade exploded between Ashkani and the black skeleton. A large amount of plastic foam poured out from the grenade, directly pushing the distance between the two. Several meters long, it also encompassed half of the black skeleton's body. This is the kind of foam mine that Kaylan used in the glacier ruins. This thing is often used by the soldiers of the garrison to suppress riots. He just saw several boxes at the blockade, so he took a few and put them in my arms. I didn't expect that it would come in handy at this time. Kaylan ran over, took out thinner and sprayed it on Ashkani a few times to dissolve the plastic foam stuck to his body, and then fired another foam mine towards the black skeleton that was about to break free. "Huh, huh." Ashkani gasped, and with the help of Kaylan, he took several steps back, and then sat down on the ground, his red eyes staring at the high-intensity person trapped in the room. A black skeleton in plastic foam. Kaylan noticed that there were 3 triangular pinpricks on Major Ashkani's arm, and there was fresh blood oozing next to the pinpricks. This guy had just given himself a stimulant to change. "You have to be so brave. Is there any more foam mine? This thing is about to break free," Kaylan shouted to the non-commissioned officers and agents behind him. "No need, I'll do it," Victoria's voice came from above her head, and with a crisp click sound, she directly crushed the thin composite board on the roof of the cold drink shop, and once again fell from the sky. Indoor. Victoria grabbed the black skeleton's head, and her steel claw-like prosthetic fingers exerted force instantly, crushing the black skeleton's skull in the blink of an eye. The skull alone cannot make it incapacitated. Kaylan reminded that the skeleton they encountered in the cargo hold was so mutilated that it only had an upper body and 2 arms, but it could still compete with Akira Asano. The vitality of this thing is so great that even cockroaches would be defeated. Moreover, in addition to these characteristics, the black skeleton seems to have some special abilities. He still has fresh memories of the black hole that almost swallowed up Ian's self-awareness. However, judging from the information collected so far, Kaylan also has some rough guesses in his mind. the ability of the black skeleton should be a gift from the great god, and the alpha man as a servant wants to control this kind of power. Power must come at the cost of life. If you calculate it this way, the alpha civilization language other than the holy word should be one level lower than the black skeleton. Kaylan previously tried to use the alpha civilization language to control the black skeleton. Skeleton, as a result, suffered backlash from the other party. But Kaylan always feels that this explanation is a bit far-fetched. Could it be that the great god believed in by the alpha civilization still exists and can hear the prayers of believers? But, if it could respond to the demands of believers, how could alpha civilization disappear? Could it be that these guys committed a terrible crime and made this god angry? I know, Victoria said coldly. Just as Kaylan was thinking about these things, she had already dismantled the black skeleton into a pile of broken bones, not even sparing small joints such as fingers and toes. All broken. Do you feel that this guy's purpose is actually to delay time? Kaylan glanced at the broken bones on the ground and said thoughtfully. I can see it. It clearly had a chance to kill my men, but it only seriously injured them. Victoria nodded. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen-Mi-san. Chapter 203. It seems we have to hurry up. Kaylan picked up a black bone from the ground. As expected, there was a sticky and transparent substance similar to a slug in the bone marrow. There is no need to worry about this thing. According to the Research Institute's report, after losing the protection of the bones, the medulla inside can only survive in the external environment for 48 hours, and there is no risk of infection or parasitism. Victoria kicked with her feet. Kicked the pile of bones on the ground. There is indeed no need to take care of this thing, but the wounded, what are you going to do? Kaylan casually threw the bones aside and asked. The wounded, you can ask my people to send the wounded back to the blockade. Major Ashkani sitting aside gasped. Anyway, in this situation, my men people, they actually can't be of much help, on the contrary, they will become a burden. But if we continue walking in, there will be a lot of wounded people. If every wounded person needs to be sent back to the blockade, then the troop reduction will be too fast. Kaylan shook his head. I think we should send someone back to the blockade, place the injured nearby, or suggest a centralized medical point. Kaylan raised his head and glanced at the suspended train track in mid-air, and said, it's a pity that there is no energy, otherwise the problem of using the suspended train to transport the wounded out would be solved. I agree with the plan to set up a centralized medical point, Victoria said. The medical point can also be used as a temporary transfer station. Have you seen the private clinic in front? The building is strong enough, and there should be a certain amount of medicine and medical equipment in it. I think this place is good. Kaylan pointed to a clinic about 200 meters away with a Red Cross sign. Said the two-story building. In less than 10 minutes, the investigation team had occupied the clinic that Kaylan mentioned. Report, sir, 4 corpses were found on the second floor of the clinic. No signs of infection were found, and no survivors were found. Elisha quickly walked down from the second floor, and several other agents moved the 4 corpses to the first floor. Inside the hall. 1 doctor, 3, they should be patients who came to see a doctor. Have you confirmed the cause of death? Kaylan glanced at the 4 corpses one by one, raised his head, and asked who was standing aside. Liao Shat. The cause of death of the 3 patients was bullets hitting the heart and lungs. As for the doctor, he had many bruises on his body, multiple fractures on his right arm and leg, and was shot in the abdomen. The main cause of death should still be gunshot wounds. In addition, there are traces of fighting on the second floor. This is the shell casing found on the floor, Elisha said, raising the evidence bag in his hand. 11.43 mm caliber subsonic heavy pistol bullet. From the inscription on the bottom of the shell, from the looks of it, it should be a product of the Arezaka Consortium's own military factory. It seems that when the heretics wanted to take the doctor away, the doctor resisted and was beaten to death. Kaylan analyzed. It should be to protect his patients, A good what a shame, guy. There is no time to mourn for strangers. Victoria only glanced at the body on the ground, and then said to Ashkani, Major, I ask you to leave one mecha to protect the stronghold, while the others continue. Push deeper into the East 9th District. Only one mecha is left? Isn't it too few? If the stronghold is attacked. Ashkani was interrupted by Victoria before he finished speaking. If the stronghold is attacked, even if we leave all the mechas behind, we may not be able to defend them. Our task is not to protect the wounded, but as soldiers, they should have enough awareness. Major Ashkani glanced at Victoria, hesitated for a few seconds, and finally swallowed the words that had reached his throat. Indeed, they are all soldiers, and he should have enough awareness. If there are no objections, except for those who stay at the medical point, others will continue to push deeper. Our time is very tight. I request that we must arrive at the entrance of the East 9 District Central Industrial Park within 20 minutes. The East 9 District Central Industrial Park that Victoria calls is located in the middle of East 9 District, covering an area of nearly 12 square kilometers. It is the core area of the area controlled by the Arezaka Consortium and is also the location of the consortium's headquarters. Unlike the outer neighborhoods of East 9th Ward, only formal employees of the Arezaka Foundation are allowed to enter the Central Industrial Park. The further you go, the higher the level of authority required. As for the Arezaka Tower as the headquarters of the consortium, only members of the Arezaka family and their personal staff can enter and exit freely. The height of Arezaka Tower is 286 meters, almost touching the dome of this layer of the arc. Among the buildings with an average height of less than 100 meters, such a tall tower is particularly conspicuous. Even in the East 9th District the periphery can be seen even if you raise your head. And this tower is the final destination of the reconnaissance team. However, just as the investigation team walked out of the narrow alley, they encountered another obstacle. Only this time, the enemies they encountered were real human beings, a group of heretical sect believers wearing black robes, but under their black robes, they were mercenaries from the Ranger Security Company. Standard armor. The Ranger Security Company is one of the industries under the name of the Arezaka Consortium. According to the published data, this company has at least 150 armed mercenaries who can be regarded as the top elite in the industry, but now, the number of mercenaries who blocked the investigation team at the alley alone was probably more than 200, if it weren't for several bloodhound mechas standing at the front with their heavy armor, there would have been no more than 200 people between the investigation team and them. One face-to-face encounter would probably kill more than half of them. Are these guys crazy? Ashkani hid behind a bloodhound. Bullets fired from a distance kept hitting the mecha, making a ding-ding sound unique to metal collisions. There was a crisp sound. The opponent's intensive firepower made it impossible for him to lean out and fight back. He had just made an attempt. Fortunately, his movement was half a beat slow. A stray bullet passed through his shoulder and hit the carbon fiber shoulder. A half-centimeter deep ravine was plowed on the armor, and Ashkani was dragged to the ground by the force attached to the bullet. If he had gone a little faster, the bullet would have hit his face instead of his shoulder armor. It would be great if they were really crazy. They obviously have a very good tactical plan, and the layout of several firepower points is also very particular. The blind spots between each other can make up for each other. We can't use the mecha as a cover to rush out, Elisha said while bandaging the wound of an injured agent. I have just launched 3 orange flares. In less than half an hour, the large forces will move into the East 9th District. Their resistance is meaningless. I really don't know how much money the Arezaka Consortium paid them and what they will do. So determined to work hard, Ashkani said that flares are the only way they can communicate with the troops outside, and the meaning of the 3 orange flares is the situation is urgent and requires an immediate attack. I'm afraid it's not a matter of money, Kaylan sighed. Have you seen the black robes they are wearing? These people have probably been brainwashed by the heretical section. The Arezaka Consortium should have been brainwashed by the heretical section. The sect has been infiltrated for a long time, and now I think it's not a big problem if we directly equate the two. Actually, Commissioner Victoria has always known that the Arezaka Consortium has problems, but these Japanese people are so meticulous about the details. We checked many times and found no clues. Instead, the Arezaka Consortium complained to the top management of ARC several times that our investigation was serious, interfering with their normal operations. After that, the investigation into them basically came to a standstill, Elisha said with a bitter face. To put it bluntly, I think the top management of ARC may have an insider, Kaylan said. At this time, Victoria suddenly turned her head and glanced at him, but didn't say much. It seemed that she acquiesced in Ian's statement. It seems that there are people in your security bureau who dare not move. Kaylan stuck out the muzzle of his gun and fired a few shots at random. There was a burst of fire immediately, and the metal ground at his feet was hit with sparks. It's not that I don't dare to move, it's just that I can't move yet. Victoria didn't look at herself, but Kaylan knew that she was saying this to herself. Too much curiosity is not necessarily a good thing. Okay, let's not talk about it like this. Regarding the current situation, do you have any countermeasures? We can't waste all our time here, Kaylan said. The terrain outside is a fan-shaped square. Except for a few lampposts, there are basically no shelters in the square. The exit of the alley is located at the apex of this fan-shaped square. As long as Kaylan and the others rush out, they will be attacked from behind. An all-round attack at an angle of 120 degrees, even with Victoria's mobility, it would be difficult to pass through the square in front of her. The only good news is probably that these rebels who have been brainwashed by the heretical sect do not hold heavy weapons. Otherwise, let alone a stalemate at the alley, the investigation team may have to be forced back to Kabukiko Ichiban Street. Go. You guys delay these rebels here, I'll lead a few people around. Victoria pulled out 2 Mozambique shotguns from the equipment box, inserted them into the holsters on both sides of her calves, and then placed another one filled with fragments. The grenade satchel was slung over his shoulder. Sounds like a feasible approach, provided that no new enemies appear on the detored path. Kaylan glanced at the remaining ammunition of his Gauss assault rifle, and then said, "How about I go with you?" "No, I refuse." Victoria shook her head. "You and Major Ashkani stay here. I always feel that nothing good will happen if you are around. Maybe I shouldn't have done it from the beginning. Let you enter the East 9th District. As for that, these words are too hurtful." Kaylan raised the gun above his head with some displeasure, stretched the muzzle of the gun out from the gap between the 2 mechanical arms of the bloodhound, and fired casually. A shot was fired, and a scream immediately sounded in the distance. "You see, I'm actually quite lucky. I can get away with everything." "That's just for yourself," Victoria said. Having already selected the candidates to go around, she led 4 agents directly into the alley on the right rear. "Speaking of which, are you really that unlucky to be with me?" Kaylan touched the back of his head speechlessly. "Actually, I think the commander is right. I have read your file. After the Glacier Ruins incident, you seem to have suffered disaster somewhere." Elisha whispered, "You and your teammates were captured by the 4th Fleet. The battleship was rescued, but not long after, the battleship was shot down by the death ray cannon. Then you ran to the gathering place of the exiles, but happened to run into the sacrificial ceremony. Then, you ran to Zonghai. This time is even more outrageous. Before you even boarded the icebreaker, the ship was almost sunk by a giant deep-sea eel, and not long ago, as soon as you ran to Leviathan, this ancient beast came to life. I have been with the Security Bureau for 6 years, and this is the first time I have seen a disaster star like you." "Can you blame me?" Kaylan defended. "These things clearly have nothing to do with me. Although I never believe in those claims about strange powers and gods." Elisha shrugged, "But I also think Chief Victoria is right." At this moment, a deafening roar suddenly came from the other side of the square. What? The two people who were chatting suddenly became serious. Kaylan took out a lens from his pocket, adjusted the angle slightly, and saw a humanoid beast walking towards the side. It has a living armor similar to that of a sumo wrestler. The bloodhound cannon can only cause a slight deceleration effect on its body, and even the surface of the tentacles cannot penetrate it. It's a mutant species. Kaylan spat on the ground. It's really unlucky. As soon as that guy Victoria left, a mutant species came out immediately. Now we're in trouble. I told you, nothing good will happen if I stay with you, Elisha couldn't help but say. If it gets closer again, it will have to use up the flesh-eating worm it brought. Wait a minute, don't use up your trump cards in a hurry. Kaylan raised his hand and stopped Elisha from dragging out the box containing the flesh-eating worms. This mutant doesn't seem to be the same as the sumo wrestler just now. Too much the same. Look at it, it looks like there's a person lying on its head. No, that doesn't seem to be a person. Kaylan pointed at the scene in the mirror and said. This mutant is more than 6 meters tall, and its body shape is stronger than that of a spherical sumo wrestler. In addition to the living armor composed of tentacles, heavy armor is also installed on the chest, abdomen, and joints. The head is covered in a huge metal helmet, and on the front of the helmet, there is a prajna-shaped mask. Of course, these are not the main point. The main point is that behind this huge metal helmet, there is a figure wearing a black robe. Although this figure still maintains a vague human form, what sticks out from his sleeves is two slimy tentacles extended all the way to the inside of the prajna mask, seemingly connected to the giant mutant at his feet.